Oh, hey, welcome to my channel. This is Ariel Miller with the Read Revolution, and we're going to continue with day 3 of our read aloud of Stargirl. So just sit tight, we're getting started in 1 minute. Oh, hello, everyone. Good morning. Whew. I don't know about you, but the days all seem to blur together. So I'm so glad that we have this time together so that we could go ahead and connect and continue to relate on a totally different level. So, Reading Rebels, welcome back to the Reading Revolution with Ariel Miller. This is our 3rd day of our read aloud of Stargirl by Jerry Spinelli. And just as a reminder, if you are interested in following, you can certainly go ahead and do that by clicking the free PDF that is available in all of my links on all of my social media so that you can follow with us. You're also more than welcome to just go ahead and listen because this is good old-fashioned storytelling. So with that, excuse me, we're going to get started where we left off on page 30, chapter 7. So as a brief recap, when we left off yesterday, we were thinking about Hillary Kimball and her character in contrast to Stargirl, and maybe considering why Spinelli would have created a character like Hillary Kimball and how she would stand next to Stargirl. We say next to, not literal, but considering the differences in these two different type of characters, well, not personality, but characterization, right? And we left off when Leo says to Kevin, I need to go see Archie. And we don't know who Archie is, so let's dig in and find out who indeed this Archie guy is. Sorry about that. My voice has been a little scratchy, so bear with me. Archibald Hapwood, Brewbreaker, lived in a house of bones. Jawbones, hip bones, femurs. There were bones in every room, every closet, on the back porch. Some people have stone cats on their roofs, and on his roof, Archie Brewbaker had a skeleton of Monroe, his deceased Siamese. Take a seat in his bathroom, and you find yourself facing the faintly smirking skull of Doris, a prehistoric creodon. Open the kitchen cabinet, and there we were with peanut butter and face to face with a fossil-faced, and open the kitchen cabinet where the peanut butter was kept, and you were I am having such a hard time with the F's today. Open the kitchen cabinet where the peanut butter was kept, and you were face to fossil face with an extinct fox. So I think that's actually kind of a really good point to bring up when we say face to fossil face, those triple F's, alliterative. Hard for me. I kind of have a little bit of a lisp, so you give me F's and you give me S's, and it's all sorts of messy. Archie was not morbid. He was a paleontologist. The bones were from digs he had done throughout the American West. Many were rightly his, found in his spare time. Others he collected for museums, but slipped into his own pocket or knapsack instead. Better to sit in my refrigerator than disappear in a drawer in some museum basement, he would say. When he wasn't digging up old bones, Archie Brubaker was teaching at universities in the East. He retired at the age of 65. When he was 66, his wife Autumn May died. At 67, he moved himself and his bones west to, quote, join the other fossils. He chose his home for 2 reasons. 1, its proximity to the high school. He wanted to be near kids. He had none of his own. And 2, Senor Salguero. Senor Salguero was a cactus, a 30-foot tall giant that towered over the tool shed in the backyard. It had 2 arms high on the trunk. One stuck straight out, and the other made a right turn upward as if waving adios. The waving arm was green from the elbow up. All else was brown, dead. Much of the thick, leathery skin along the trunk had come loose and crumpled in a heap about the massive foot. Senor Salguero had lost his pants. Only his ribs, some thick vertical timbers held him up. Elf owls nested in his chest. Such a beautiful description here of Senor Salguero, this big giant cactus that is next to Archie's house. I want to ask you, readers, were you able to picture this cactus in your mind? Again, similarly to the description of Stargirl earlier in the book, when you closed your eyes, were the details so vivid you could picture it and you could see it? Because I know I could. And for me, seeing I love this part when he says that Senor Segura had lost his pants, that crumpled up pants just slumping at the bottom of the base of the cactus really allows for me to see this old, beautiful, majestic cactus and just kind of the weight that time has had on him. So imagery, really powerful tool, helps us visualize the text. The old professor often talked to Senor Salguero and not to us. He was not certified to teach in Arizona, but that did not stop him. Every Saturday morning, his house became a school. Fourth graders, 12th graders, all were welcome. No tests, no grades, no attendance record. Just the best school most of us had ever gone to. He covered everything from toothpaste to tapeworms and somehow made it all fit together. He called us the Loyal Order of the Stone Bone. He gave us homemade necklaces. The pendant was a small fossil bone strung on rawhide. Years before, he had told his first class, "Call me Archie," and he never had to say it again. After dinner that day, Kevin and I walked over to Archie's. Though the official class convened on Saturday morning, kids were always welcome anytime. My school, he said, is everywhere and always in session. We found him as usual on the back porch, rocking and reading. The porch, bathed in a red gold light of sunset, faced the Maricopas. Archie's white hair seemed to give off a light of its own. The moment he saw us, he put down his book. "Students, welcome!" "Archie," we said, and turned to greet the great cactus as visitors were expected to do. "Senor Salguero," we saluted. We sat on rockers. The porch was full of them. "So, men," he said. "Business or pleasure?" "Bafflement," I said. "There's a new girl in school." He laughed. "Stargirl." Kevin's eyes popped. "You know her?" "Know her?" he said. He picked up his pipe and loaded it with cherry sweet tobacco, as he always did when settling in for a long lecture of conversation. "Good question." He lit the pipe. "Let's say she's been on the porch here quite a few times." White smoke puffed like Apache signals from the corner of his mouth. "I was wondering when you'd start asking questions." He chuckled to himself. "Bafflement. Good word. She is different, isn't she?" Kevin and I burst into laughter and nods. At that moment, I realized how much I had been craving Archie's confirmation. Kevin exclaimed, "Like another species?" Archie cocked his head as if he had just caught the sound of a rare bird. The pipe steam anchored a weary grin. A sweet scent filled the air about our rocking chairs. He stared at Kevin. "On the contrary, she is one of us. Most decidedly. She is more us than we are us. She is, I think, who we really are or were." Archie talked that way sometimes in riddles. We didn't always know what he was saying, but our ears didn't much care. We just wanted to hear more. As the sun dipped below the mountains, it fired a final dart at Archie's flashing eyebrows. "She's homeschooled, you know. Her mother brought her to me. I guess she wanted a break from playing teacher one day a week. 4, 5, yes, 5 years now." Kevin pointed. "You created her." Archie smiled, puffed. "Oh no, that was done long before me. Some people are saying she's some kind of alien sent down here from Alpha Centauri or something," said Kevin. He chuckled, but not too convincingly. He half believed it. Archie's pipe had gone out. He relit it. "She's anything but. She's an earthling if there ever was one." "So it's not just an act," said Kevin. "An act? No. If anybody's acting, it's us. She's as real as—" He looked around. He picked up the tiny wedge-like skull of Barney, a 60-million-year-old Palestine rodent, and held it up. "As real as Barney." I felt a jolt of pride at having reached this conclusion myself. "But the name," said Kevin, leaning forward. "Is it real?" "The name?" Archie shrugged. "Every name is real. That's the nature of names. When she first showed up, she called herself Pocket Mouse, then Mud Pie, then what? Holly Gully, I believe. Now, Stargirl." The word came out whispery. My throat was dry. Archie looked at me. "Whatever strikes her fancy. Maybe that's how names ought to be, huh? Why have you stuck with just one your whole life?" "What about her parents?" said Kevin. "What about them?" What do you think? Archie shrugged. I guess they agree. What do they do? Kevin said. Breathe, eat, clip their toenails. Kevin laughed. You know what I mean. Where do they work? Mrs. Carraway, until a few months ago, was Stargirl's teacher. I understand she also makes costumes for movies. Kevin poked me. The crazy clothes! Her father Charles works, and he smiled at us. Where else? Micatronics, we said in chorus. I said it with wonder, for I had imagined something more exotic. Kevin said, so where is she from? A natural question in a city as young as Micah. Nearly everybody had been born somewhere else. Archie's eyebrows went up. Good question. He took a long pull on the pipe. Some would say Minnesota, but in her case, he let out the smoke, and his face disappearing in a gray cloud. A sweet haze veiled the sunset, cherries roasting on the Maricopas, he whispered, Rara Avis. Archie, said Kevin, you're not making a lot of sense. Archie laughed. Do I ever? Kevin jumped up. I want to put her on hot seat. Dorco Borlaug here doesn't want to. Archie studied me through the smoke. I thought I saw approval, but when he spoke, he merely said, work it out, men. We talked until dark. We said adios to Senor Salguero. On our way out, Archie said more to me than to Kevin, I thought. You'll know her more by your questions than by her answers. Keep looking at her long enough. One day you might see someone you know. I'm going to read that again. You'll know her more by your questions than by her answers. Keep looking at her long enough. One day you might see someone you know. What do you think Archie means by this statement? Especially the part with, one day you might see someone you know. Chapter 8. Remember at the end of chapter 6 and at the beginning of today's reading, I asked you to consider Hillary Kimball. I want you to keep that in mind and continue to think about what type of character is Hillary Kimball. Carraway had become the most popular person in school. How did it happen? Was it the cheerleading? Remember, we also talked about the social climate, and we also talked about societal expectations. So we talked about this perception of being a cheerleader is associated with popularity. So is the fact that Stargirl is a cheerleader, is that what catapulted her to fame at Micah High? Question mark. The last football game of this season was her first as a cheerleader. The grandstand was packed. Students, parents, alumni. Never had so many people come to a football game to see a cheerleader. She did all the regular cheers and routines and more. In fact, she never stopped cheering. While the other girls were taking breaks, she went on jumping and yelling. She roamed areas that had always been ignored, the far ends of the grandstand, the spectators in the goalpost, the snack bar parents, all found themselves with their own arm-pumping cheerleader. She ran straight across the 50-yard line and joined the other team's cheerleader. We laughed as they stood there with their mouths open. She cheered in front of the players' bench, and she was shooed away by a coach. At halftime, she didn't play. She played her ukulele with the band. In the second half, she got acrobatic. She did cartwheels and backflips. At one point, the game was stopped, and 3 zebra-shirted officials ran toward the end zone. She had shimmied up the goalpost, tightrope walked out to the middle of the crossbar, and was now standing there with her arms raised in a touchdown sign. She was commanded down to a standing ovation and flashing cameras. As we filed out afterward, no one had mentioned how boring the game itself had been. No one cared that the Electrons had lost again. In his column next day, the sports editor of the Micah Times referred to Stargirl as the best athlete on the field. We couldn't wait for basketball season. Was it a Hillary Kimball backlash? Several days after the birthday song, I heard a shout in the hallway. Don't! I ran. A crowd was gathered at the top of the stairwell. They were all staring at something. I pushed my way through. Hillary Kimball was standing at the upper landing, grinning. She was holding Cinnamon the rat, dangling by its tail over the railing, nothing but space between it and the first floor. Stargirl was on the steps below, looking up. The scene froze. The bell for the next class rang. Nobody moved. Stargirl said nothing, merely looked. The 8 toes of Cinnamon's front paws splayed apart. Its tiny, unblinking eyes were bulging black as clothes. Again, a voice rang out, Don't, Hillary! Suddenly, Hillary dropped it. Someone screamed, but the rat fell only to the floor at Hillary's feet. She sent Stargirl a final sneer and left. What kind of person is Hillary? I'm going to say that Hillary is a bully. And I want you to think about what evidence in the text thus far would continue to suggest that Hillary is a bully. So, thinking about this incident right now, and what other incidents would also kind of support the fact that Hillary is a bully, and also she's an unkind character, especially in contrast to Stargirl, correct? Was it Dory Dilson? Dory Dilson was a brown-haired ninth grader who wrote poems in a loose-leaf notebook half as big as herself, and whose name nobody knew until the day she sat down at Stargirl's table for lunch. Next day, the table was full. No longer did Stargirl eat lunch, or walk the hallways, or do anything else alone at school. Was it us? Did we change? Why didn't Hillary Kimball drop the rat to its death? Did she see something in our eyes? Whatever the reason, by the time we returned from Thanksgiving break, it was clear the change had occurred. Suddenly, Stargirl was not as dangerous, and we rushed to embrace her. Calls of Stargirl flew down the hallways. We couldn't say her name often enough. It tickled us to mention her name to strangers and watch the expressions on their faces. Girls liked her, boys liked her, and most remarkable, the attention came from all kinds of kids. Shy mice and princesses, jocks and eggheads. We honored her by imitation. A chorus of ukuleles strummed in the lunchroom. Flowers appeared on classroom desks. One day it rained and a dozen girls ran outside to dance. The pet shop at the Micah Mall ran out of rats. The best chance for us to express our admiration came in the first week of December. We all gathered in the auditorium for the annual oratorical contest. Sponsored by the Arizona League of Women Voters, the event was open to any high school student who cared to show his or her stuff as a public speaker. The microphone was yours for 7 minutes. Talk about anything you like. The winner would move on to the district competition. Usually only 4 or 5 students entered the contest at MAHS. That year there were 13, including Stargirl. You didn't have to be a judge to see that she was far and away the best. She gave an animated speech, a performance really, titled Elf Owl, Call Me By My First Name. Her gray-brown homesteader's dress was the color of her subject. I couldn't see her freckles from the audience, but I imagined them dancing on her nose as she flicked her head this way and that. When she finished, we stomped on the floor and whistled and shouted for more. While the judges went through the charade of conferring, a film was shown. It was a brief documentary about the previous year's finals. It featured the winner, a boy from Yuma. The most riveting moments of the film came not only during the contest, but during its aftermath when the boy arrived back at Yuma High. The whole school mobbed him in the parking lot. Banners, cheerleaders, band music, confetti, streamers. Pumping his arms in the air, the returning hero rode their shoulders into the school. The film ended. The lights went on, and the judges proclaimed Stargirl the winner. She would now go on to the district competition in Red Rock, they said. The state finals would be held in Phoenix in April. Again and again, we whooped and whistled. Such was the acclamation we gave her in those last weeks of the year, but we also gave something to ourselves. So things are really starting to change at Micah High School. So what kind of changes have we started to see? And also, I want to kind of ask you is what kind of changes do we believe that Stargirl is having on the emotional climate? Because prior to her arrival, everyone at Micah fell into this set, repeated pattern of conformity. And now Stargirl comes, and we can say she stirs the pot. She creates this, and we're not going to say conflict, but what she creates is she's an upheaval. She disturbs the status quo simply by being herself. Keep that in mind as we move on to chapter 9, which will be our actual, we're going to read chapter 10 today too, I believe. But keep that in mind as we start to read chapter 9 is the change in the social emotional climate at Micah High School. In the Sonoran Desert, there are ponds. You could be standing in the middle of one and not know it, because the ponds are usually dry. Nor would you know that inches below your feet, frogs are sleeping. Their heart beats down to once or twice per minute. They lie dormant and waiting. These mud frogs, for without water their lives are incomplete, they are not fully themselves. For many months they sleep like this within the earth. And then the rain comes, and 100 pairs of eyes pop out of the mud, and at night 100 voices call across the moonlit water. What a beautiful description of the mud frogs in the Sonoran Desert. It makes me wonder if the significance is more powerful than a nature lesson. It's figurative. It's a comparison. So what kind of comparison, and who's being compared, and why is it important? I'm not going to give you the answer. I might actually, but who knows? But who are the mud frogs? Who's lying dormant, and who's the rain? It was wonderful to see. Wonderful to be in the middle of the mud frogs awakening all around us. We were awash in tiny attentions. Small gestures, words, empathies, thoughts to be extinct came to life. For years, as strangers among us had passed suddenly in the hallways, now we looked and we nodded. We smiled. If someone got an A, others celebrated too. If someone sprained an ankle, others felt the pain. We discovered the color of each other's eyes. It was a rebellion she led, a rebellion for, than a rebellion against. For ourselves, for the dormant mud frogs we had been for so long. So there's your answer. Kids whose voices had never been heard spoke up in class. Letters to the editor filled a whole page of the newspaper's December edition. More than 100 students tried out for the spring review. One kid started a camera club. Another wore hush puppies instead of sneakers. A plain, timid girl painted her toenails Kelly green. A boy showed up with purple hair. None of this was publicly acknowledged. There were no PA announcements, no TV coverage, no headlines in the Micah Times. MAHS students astir. Individuality erupts. But it was there. It was happening. I was used to it, peering through the lens to framing the picture, and I could see it. I could feel it in myself. I felt lighter, unshackled, as if something I had been carrying had fallen away. But I didn't know what to do about it. There was no direction to my liberation. I had no urge to color my hair or trash my sneakers. So I enjoyed the feeling and watched the once amorphous student body separate itself into hundreds of individuals. The pronoun we itself seemed to crack and drift apart in pieces. Ironically, as we discovered and distinguished ourselves, a new collective came into being. A vitality, a presence, a spirit that had not been there before. It echoed from the rest of the gyms. Go Electrons! It sparkled in the water fountains. At the holiday assembly, the words of the alma mater had wings. It's a miracle, I gushed to Archie one day. He stood on the edge of his porch. He did not turn. He pulled the pipe slowly from between his lips. He spoke as if to Senor Stargirl or to the blazing mountains beyond. Best hope it's not, he said. The trouble with miracles is they don't last long. And the trouble with bad times is you can't sleep through them. It was a golden age, those few weeks in December and January. How could I know that when the end came, I would be in the middle of it? Coming back to the beginning of the chapter, when we talked about sleeping, right? And we talked about the comparison, the metaphor to the mud frogs. And Archie says the trouble with bad times is you can't sleep through them. This last little tidbit at the end of chapter 9, when we talk about this hint, Archie says things for a reason, and authors say things for a reason reading Rebels. We don't just say them. There's a purpose, there's an intention, there's a meaning behind what we say, how we say it, and why we say it. So what kind of literary device is being employed here? That hint, that little teeny bit of something's going to happen. And here's the bigger thing I want you to think about, is this hint. How could I have known that when the end came, I would be in the middle of it? The tone of this hint. Oh, it's kind of ominous feeling. It's definitely a change from what's currently happening at Micah. So consider this as we continue to read on. We will read chapter 10 for today, and we will conclude there, and then we will pick back up tomorrow. All my resistance to putting Stargirl on hot seat vanished. Okay, I said to Kevin, let's do it. Let's schedule her. He started off. I grabbed his arm. Wait, ask her first. He laughed. Right, like she's going to say no. No one had ever said no to the hot seat. Any reluctance to answering personal or embarrassing questions always yielded to the lure of appearing on TV. If anyone could resist that lure, I figured it would be Stargirl. That day after school, Kevin came to me with a thumbs up and grinning. It's a go! It's a yes! First, I was surprised. This didn't fit my impression of her. I didn't know that this was an early glimpse of something that we were soon to see much more of. Behind the dazzling talents and differentness, she was far more normal than I had actually realized. Then I was elated. We yippied, we high-fived. We saw visions of our most popular show ever. This was mid-January. We set the date for February 13th, the day before Valentine's. We wanted a full month for build-up. With my resistance now gone, I jumped in with both feet. We planned a promo campaign. We got art students to do posters. We jotted down questions for Kevin to ask in case the jury ran out. Fat chance of that happening. We didn't have to post the usual jury notice. Dozens of kids volunteered. And then things changed again. In the courtyard of our school stood a 5-foot sheet of plywood in the shape of a roadrunner. It was a bulletin board strictly for student use, always taped and tacked with messages and announcements. One day we found the following computer printout taped to the plywood roadrunner. I pledge allegiance to United Turtles of America and to the fruit bats of Borneo, one planet in the Milky Way incredible with justice and black bean burritos for all. Handwritten across the bottom were the words, "This is how she says the Pledge of Allegiance." No one had to tell us who she was. Apparently, she was overheard in homeroom as we said the pledge each morning. I don't know, guys, but black bean burritos for all sounds like a pretty tasty idea to me. As far as I knew, we were not a particularly patriotic bunch. I didn't hear people saying they were offended. Some thought it was funny. Some giggled and nodded knowingly as if to say, there she goes again. On the following mornings, more than one kid was heard reciting the new pledge. Within days, a story wildfire through the student body. A senior girl, Anna Grisdale, lost her grandfather after a long illness. The funeral took place on a Saturday morning. For a while, everything seemed routine. The crowd of people at the church, the line of cars with their headlights on, the smaller group clustered around the grave for the final farewell. After the brief graveside service, the funeral director handed everyone a long stem flower. Upon leaving, each mourner laid his or her flower over the casket, and this was when Anna Grisdale first noticed Stargirl. Through her own tears, Anna could see that Stargirl was crying also. She wondered if Stargirl had been at the church as well. Even more, she wondered why Stargirl was there at all. Could she have been friends with her grandfather without Anna's knowing it? Anna's mother asked her who the unfamiliar girl was. Afterward, the mourners were invited to Anna's house for lunch. About 30 came. There was a buffet of cold cuts and salads and cookies. Stargirl was there, chatting with members of the family, but not eating or drinking anything. Suddenly, Anna heard her mother's voice. It was no louder than the others, but it was different. "What are you doing here?" Sudden stillness, everyone staring. They were in front of the picture window. Anna had never seen her mother so angry. Mrs. Grisdale had been close to her father. They had built an addition to their house so he could live with them. She stared down at Stargirl. "Answer me!" Stargirl gave no reply. "You didn't even know him, did you?" Stargirl said nothing. "Did you?" And then Anna's mother, flinging the door wide open and pointing as if banishing her to the desert, said, "Leave my house." Stargirl left. Danny Pike was 9 years old. He loved to ride the bicycle that he had gotten for his birthday. One day after school, he lost control and plowed into a mailbox. He broke his leg, but that wasn't the worst part of it. A blood clot developed, and he was airlifted to Children's Hospital in Phoenix, where he was operated on. For a while, it was touch and go, but within a week, he was on his way back home. All of this was reported in the Micah Times, as was the celebration when Danny arrived at his home in Pinion Lane. The 5-column photo in the Times showed Danny on his father's shoulders, surrounded by a mob of neighbors, and in the foreground was a new bike and a big sign that read, "Welcome home, Danny." It wasn't until days later that the front page appeared on the Plywood Roadrunner. We gathered around to see something we hadn't noticed before. An arrow from a thick red felt marker pointed at one of the tiny faces crowded into the frame. It was the face of a girl beaming as if Danny Pike were her little brother back from the dead. It was Stargirl. And then there was the bike. Various members of the Pike family, parents, grandparents, etc., all thought someone else had bought Danny a new bike. Several days went by before they discovered that, to their great surprise, none of them had bought him the bike. So where did the bike come from? High schoolers who had heard the story and picture had a pretty good idea. Apparently the Pikes did not. The bike became the focus of a family squabble. Mr. Pike was mad because nobody asked him if he would admit to buying the bike, and probably because he hadn't done it himself. Mrs. Pike was mad because no way, not for at least a year, would she allow Danny back on wheels. One night, the new, still unridden bike wound up in the Pike's front curb with the trash cans. By the time the trash collector had come the next day, it was gone. Danny had gotten a BB gun instead. Pledge of Allegiance, the Grisdale funeral, the Danny Pike affair. All of these things were noted, but they had no immediate impact on Stargirl's popularity at school. Not so with the cheerleading and the boys' basketball season. We're starting to learn a little bit more about what we can presume is Stargirl's activities. So she spent a Saturday at a funeral. She attended this welcome home bash or, gathering, if you will, and there's a bike. And we can also assume that the bike came from Stargirl. And we're starting to see this for sure, because we had feelings before, this concrete evidence that this is how this person spends their time, completely and utterly selfless. However, how are her actions being perceived? The Pledge of Allegiance may have been cool and funny, but does it seem like it's still cool and funny, or is that kind of changing? And while her acts of support and love and kindness are coming from a good place, why do you think people misinterpret acts of kindness? How do they view them? On that note, Reading Rebels, we end today on page 48, chapter 11. I am looking forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Same place, same time, 9:30 Pacific Standard Time, to continue our reading of Stargirl. Reading Rebels, keep doing good things out there. Keep reading. Spread the word, the love of the written word. Love you, mean it. Have a good one. Mwah!
Bye.